We'll have announcements. If you have any announcements, we'll make those after our guest speaker. He's come a long way, so we'll put him at the front of the list. Right now, he's the Senior Policy Analyst at the Center for Immigration Studies in Washington, D.C., and he's one of the nation's leading authorities on immigration. And we're not talking about immigration, we're talking about illegals being here, and that's not immigration, really. Dr. Steinlight, he's going to review what's really behind the invasion by illegal aliens and any fallout from the random murder of Kate Steinley in San Francisco by a 5-time deported illegal alien, and about the National Socialists, that's the Democrats here in California, run in California. They doubled down this last week. I don't know if you heard that. I believe it was AB 4. They made the state of California a sanctuary state, which is unconstitutional, illegal, and no matter what you say about it, they've thrown all of the immigration laws out the window. We're a sanctuary state now. And it was approved on a straight party line vote. So right now, we have the right person who's going to connect all the dots for us. Let's welcome Dr. Stephen Steinlight.
Well, I don't know if I can connect all the dots, but I'll try to connect a good number of them. Good evening. It's an honor and a pleasure to address the Southern Butte Tea Party. I want to thank President Larry Druga for inviting me and being a great help in securing other venues in this beautiful part of California, which is too hot to look at, and because of the way the gigs got arranged, I'm going to be doing, I think, 1,000 miles of driving in the next 4 days. I have a reputation as a person who speaks at epic length, and so I want to just tell you a story that is kind of a cautionary tale for people like me. And there's a young academic, and he is teaching at one of the smaller state campuses in Michigan, and he's kind of a rising star, and he gets invited to the flagship campus, the University of Michigan, and in Ann Arbor, and there's a large group, and he gives his presentation, and he thinks it's gone pretty well. When it's over, he's trying to work his way to the back of the room to get some of the miserable white wine and lousy cheese and crackers that they offer at such events. And a kind of old curmudgeon follows him and says, "You were boring." Well, he doesn't feel very good about that, but he wants his white wine, and he keeps moving back, and the guy follows him and then says to him, "And you talk too long." And he continues, and just as he's about to make it to the cheese, the guy says one more thing. He says, "And I disagree with everything you said." Now, the chair of the history department has overheard this, and he comes over and he said, "Look, I don't want you to take anything that this guy has said personally. He's an idiot. He was dead wood here 40 years ago. No one respects him. In fact, many of us believe that he is demented." And so the visiting professor said, "Well, how do you know that?" And he said, "Because all he ever does is repeat what everyone else says." To borrow a phrase from the great Dr. Samuel Johnson, it will concentrate our minds wonderfully if I open with this seminal observation. Contemporary mass low-skill immigration is the paramount issue America faces because it has the greatest capacity to transform this country. It can literally unmake America, and it is unmaking it even now. What we do about it is the most significant political choice we will make in our lifetime, And I have to add, assuming the political class condescends to permit the American people to have a say. They haven't up to now. To choose wisely, we have to free ourselves from historical nostalgia, which can cloud our vision. We also have to reject outright the policies that benefited our forebears. Our moral imperative is to do what is right for the generations yet to come. Immigration is not an idol to be worshipped. It is not an absolute good, regardless of scale or historical context. And the wrong immigration policy can destroy us. Like all public policy, its merits ought to be based on two criteria only. One, whether it serves the national interest at a given historical moment, and secondly, whether it is constitutional. By national interest, I mean the greatest good for the greatest number of American citizens and legal residents, period. Immigration is value neutral. In the language that Aristotle used in his Ethics, it is an activity, not a result. It is a means, not an end. The goal of wise public policy is a free, just, prosperous, and orderly nation. Immigration can hinder it. Achieving that goal, it can help us achieve that goal, but that depends entirely on circumstances. When the great waves arrived from Europe from the 1840s to 1924, America was a very different place. And immigration was a mighty engine of American prosperity and its ascent to global power. We were the industrial colossus of the world, the equivalent of 5 Chinas. And the economy needed all the workers it could get, skilled, semi-skilled, and unskilled. We needed millions of small farmers to feed an expanding population, and millions came from Ireland, Italy, Poland, Germany. This was still an empty continent to fill. That world is long gone, turning mass immigration into a harmful anachronism. And by the way, I'm talking about all immigration. Low-skill immigration, legal or illegal. But it continues. In fact, in the last decade, we have witnessed the highest immigration in all American history. We had 12 million in one decade, and the foreign-born now represent 51 million of us, about 1 in 7. It's axiomatic that immigration by low-skill workers is incompatible with the needs of a modern post-industrial society. In this America, the America we live in, upward social and economic mobility are entirely dependent on education, which the great majority of today's immigrants and illegal aliens lack. Data from the Pew Hispanic Center, that does very good work, shows some 32% of Mexican immigrants haven't completed 9th grade. 62% do not have a high school diploma. Those with higher educations can be counted in single digits, and 35% are functionally illiterate in English and Spanish. You can't make it in America with that kind of an educational background. You just can't make it. The rise of the welfare state has also fundamentally altered our assessment of immigration's value. It has turned immigration, low-skilled immigration, into a very bad bargain for everybody except the employer. We didn't have welfare during the Great Waves. The Great Waves ended in 1924, and welfare began with old age pensions in 1935. Now we have a phenomenally expensive welfare system, which the tens of millions of impoverished immigrants will bankrupt. They will not make enough in wages to pay the taxes needed to maintain the solvency of the programs on which they will depend for decades. In fact, most won't pay any taxes at all, but will receive earned income tax credits. Over 60% of immigrant families are on at least 2 major welfare programs, endangering the survival of the entire social safety net for all Americans, and that includes, by the way, Social Security. We may see it go bankrupt. Even illegal aliens, by the way, receive billions in welfare, and if you wonder why or how, you can ask me that during the Q&A. Of course, the high crime rate of Mexican immigrants and illegal aliens is on everyone's mind, given the confluence of Donald Trump's scorching remarks and then the monstrous murder only days later of Cape Steinlight, who was as much a victim of San Francisco's sanctuary city policy as she was of the man who shot her. As Larry pointed out, a Mexican alien who'd been deported 5 times and has a long criminal record. High percentages of state and federal prison system populations are made up of legal aliens. CIS just reported data showing that there are actually 276 sanctuary cities. That's nearly 50% more than was previously recorded. We just learned that California has become a sanctuary state. We are, in fact, on the verge of becoming a sanctuary nation. In the past 8 months, sanctuary cities released 8,000 illegal immigrants with criminal records or facing charges, despite requests that they be handed over to ICE, that's Immigration and Customs Enforcement, for deportation. In fact, I mean, I'm going to give you a full presentation, but I could say almost, it would be virtually true, and that is that essentially nobody is deported. No one is deported. The White House spokesperson repeated the lie that if only Congress had passed S-744, that horrible piece of the Gang of Eights legislation, these things wouldn't happen. By the way, among its many atrocious provisions, S-744 allows deported aliens to return to the United States and forgives a host of crimes. For example, if you were a member of a drug gang, to get right with the law, what did you have to do? You had to publicly say, I renounce my membership. Okay? I mean, this is typical of that legislation. Adding insult to injury, by the way, illegal alien sex offenders don't make the National Registry. They're freed from U.S. detention after spending a brief stay. Why? Because their countries of origin don't want them back, and they are released into the general population. And of course, there is no internal enforcement. Why on earth do we care whether their host countries want them back or not? You know, why do we do things like simply say, no more foreign aid, no more diplomatic relations, no visas for your people? I mean, there's things we can do, for God's sake. I mean, we don't have to be stuck with these people. Our irrational immigration policy also, of course, threatens our most basic values, allegiances, and interests. And these include very fundamental things. Things like the rule of law, our national sovereignty. We are now essentially a borderless nation. National security, protecting the power the Constitution grants we the people against its usurpation by a power-hungry executive. Maintaining political liberty by preventing America becoming a one-party state, and that will happen. Upholding the dignity of American labor by protecting from unfair competition with cheap foreign workers. Preserving the balance we have struck between the variety of our roots and a greater sense of national belonging, immortalized in that phrase, e pluribus unum. You know, I don't like hyphenated Americans, I just like Americans. And preventing the emergence of a dual language, dual culture society. Also at risk is environmental sustainability. The American West is mostly desert, and California is suffering from a drought of uncertain duration. Natural weather cycles play a central role. Poor water management has been a factor, but another factor is the vastly increased population drawing on that water supply. You know, a lot of Californians have wanted to escape and go to Colorado, and Dick Lamb, the former governor, is a good friend, and he said, you know, that's nice, but Colorado, we don't have the water to sustain a much larger population. And you see the problem you're having here. We also need to protect our sublime, spiritually nourishing landscapes from our addiction to reckless, boundless sprawl. On a recent visit to the Grand Canyon, it was my 4th, I was with a former colleague from my previous life as an academic, for which, by the way, if I were a Hindu, I know I would receive at least, say, 300 animal reincarnations to pay back. Peter is my good friend, is a confirmed atheist. He was so overwhelmed by the spiritual majesty of the Grand Canyon that after we left, he confessed to me that he was considering becoming an agnostic. And I was so moved by that. It was incredible. Now, immigration has generated a population tsunami. Most demographers believe by 2060, our population will increase from today's 300 million to 500 million. That's a 56% increase. What does that mean in terms we can understand? That would be the equivalent, well, it will be the equivalent of adding to our own population the entire current populations of France, Great Britain, and Spain. It will give us 13 additional cities the size of New York, and they will likely be in grinding poverty. The elite that attacks America for being racist, exploitative, and ungenerous conveniently ignores the fact that we accept more immigrants on an annual basis than all the rest of the world's countries combined. 1 million legally and some 500,000 to 600,000 illegally. It's the equivalent of adding 2 cities the size of Philadelphia every single year. Short-sighted legislation has already had a breathtaking impact on our demography. Most scientists in pertinent disciplines believe that America's first inhabitants arrived about 13,000 years ago, during the Pleistocene Ice Age, when hunters crossed the land bridge that is now the Bering Sea. That's an immense swath of historical time, 13,000 years. It's almost inconceivable. Now consider the fact that fully 1/3 of everyone who is here now in America came as a result of the passage of the Ill-Considered Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965. A bill not intended to increase immigration caused it to quintuple in 2 years. Within 4 years, we began getting something that we had never seen before, illegal immigration. And it rushed up to about 500,000 within a decade. The likelihood of transforming, pardon me, I want to be careful not to do the Rubio reach here. I don't know how we ever recovered from that. It really kind of killed the poor man's credibility. He sort of looked like a loon. The likelihood of transforming our disastrous immigration policy appears remote right now. A lawless, post- and anti-American president and a timorous, venal, and mendacious Congress have failed us completely. At present, we feel frustrated and powerless, but with luck, and I do say luck, that might change, and there is guarded hope for it. There's guarded reason for hope. And I'm going to conclude by talking about the deus ex machina that might make the difference. There's plenty of cause for gloom. Okay, modified Rubio. There's plenty of cause for gloom. Our political order is threatened by a president who's been eviscerating the constitutional separation of powers. He has succeeded in what amounts to a bloodless coup against Congress. Today's laws are made in the White House and not on Capitol Hill. Those laws that are passed by Congress are enforced by the president if he wants to, or not enforced if he doesn't feel like it. Under his regime, immigration is chaotic and lawless, lurching from anarchy to tyranny. The Constitution gives Congress alone the right to formulate immigration policy, and the Constitution gives Congress alone the right to make law. But Obama has usurped both, and he's done it with the acquiescence of a gutless Congress. Legislation with vast social consequences is rushed through Congress with absolutely no transparency, public awareness, or input. An example of the very worst sort is the fast-track authority, which Congress, with Republicans leading the way, bestowed on Obama for the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership. Free trade, we know how well free trade treaties work. You know, look all the jobs NAFTA gave us here. It's a treaty with 12 nations, by the way, including Mexico, Malaysia, and Vietnam. Its likely impact on immigration is catastrophic. The TPP calls for the free movement of labor. That means uncontrolled immigration. According to the Constitution, foreign treaties are the law of the land. Now that it's been adopted, the treaty is sovereign, and Congress cannot amend or override it. The treaty supersedes Article 1 of the Constitution, which gives Congress plenary authority over immigration and naturalization. Gone. That authority is now in the White House. Events are overtaking us, almost so quickly we don't know how to react. Another surge of illegal aliens from Central America is in the offing, and it's going to overwhelm the southern border anytime. The administration, of course, is completely complicit in this. It's behind it. as it was in last year's surge. Senator Cruz recently discovered a smoking gun, a year-old PowerPoint presentation to Congress prepared by White House staff and 4 cabinet departments. It shows the administration, of course, played a role in and was totally cognizant of the arrival of 60,000 alleged illegal minors in 2014, and the administration predicts twice that number are going to be coming, say, within the next 2 months. The DHS makes ludicrous claims that the border is now secure. Of course, you'll remember they've been making these claims going back 15 years at least. Added manpower has led to marginal improvement. But the head of the Border Patrol in Arizona notes that 70% who want to cross the border make it. The only trend worth noting is the change in the percentage crossing the border as opposed to the percentage who simply overstay visas. They've switched. That's it. Until recently, 60% of illegal aliens walked across the border, and 40% entered legally on a visa and then simply disappeared into America. Now 60% overstay their visas and 40% walk in. Thanks to Obama's conspiracy, and that's exactly what it was, to destroy ICE and to destroy deportation power, we have essentially no internal enforcement. Internally, things are, if anything, worse than they are on the border. Obama plans to give DACA recipients advanced parole. That's a quick path to citizenship. In March, he issued another stealth amnesty by diktat. He does everything unilaterally, loosening rules associated with the L-1B visa, permitting multinational corporations with U.S. offices to import workers for 5 years. The translation is forever. No one ever leaves America. The absence of wage guidelines incentivizes employers to import them en masse and fire Americans. And companies firing Americans have the gall to expect the Americans to train the foreigners who are stealing their jobs. It's incredible. I have a good friend at IBM in Connecticut who's right now training the person who's going to replace him after 36 years with IBM. Despite repeated administration lies, deportations have dropped 42% since Obama took office. Finally, just this last July 3, we all got to celebrate it, I guess, the next day. The president and the head of DHS, Jay Johnson, admitted, in fact, that they've been gaming us all along. The lies about deportation and the nullification of immigration law were really prerequisites for a radical transformation of immigration policy in which illegal aliens will no longer be deported, but integrated into American society. That is, sanctuary nation. If you're surprised by anything about that announcement, other than its brazenness, I suggest you check your pulse and see if you're alive. Each of us has moments when our faith in the system has a head-on collision with political establishment cynicism. We shared one recently that forces us to consider a really fearful question. Is America still a democracy? If I recall correctly, there was an election on November 4, and it had no consequences. A post-American president doubled down on an immigration policy the American electorate explicitly rejected. The GOP ran on that issue, but they played bait and switch with us, and as soon as they won, they got rid of it as quickly as they could. Exhilaration following the midterm election was followed by a sense of betrayal. We inflicted a crushing defeat on Obama's brand of post-American left-wingism. The election was Armageddon for the Democrats. Obama now holds the record for the greatest number of congressional losses sustained by the party of any two-term president in American history. But a lot of good is done for us, yes? The Democrat Senate majority of 60, counting the 2 independents that caucused with them, fell to 44. In 2009, think of the changes over his presidency. They had 256 members of the House. Now they've got 192. In 2009, the Democrats had 28 governors. They have 18 now. Democrat carnage in state legislatures is even more staggering. They're at their lowest point in 100 years. America's political landscape hasn't been this red since Ike defeated Truman. Okay, the Republican Party won, but what principles, if any, prevailed? And how did the stupid party snatch defeat from the jaws of a victory this sweeping? We've got a lame duck president on steroids getting everything he wants from a GOP-dominated Congress, one trophy legacy after another, and his approval ratings are rising, and they're close to 50%. One reason, of course, is that the GOP has lousy leadership. But the main factor, I mean, why doesn't John Boehner just do the smart thing? I mean, he spends his life essentially as a piñata for House conservatives. You know, why doesn't he just quit, spend more time in his tanning bed, and become a K Street lobbyist and make, you know, $1 zillion working for Awful Products Incorporated instead of betraying every principle Republicans are supposed to have? So, okay, lousy leadership is one problem, but it's what the election was won on that's really caused the issue to be so bad. Exit polls show that 3/4 of the people who voted Republican did so out of opposition to Obama's immigration policy. Depending how you pose the question, and there are a lot of polls, and I know polls are dicey, but still, between 63% and 76% of Americans opposed Obama's making immigration policy on his own without Congress. 56% opposed a pathway to citizenship for illegal aliens. Despite that, the GOP leadership does not want to be reminded why the party won. Now that stance strikes me as utterly counterintuitive because immigration is the richest red meat populism there is. It's the best issue they've got. If feckless, tone-deaf Romney had given just one speech connecting massive low-skill immigration to the loose job market and to the coming bankruptcy of Social Security, he'd be president right now. He lost because 6 million white American Christian GOP-leaning working-class voters sat at home and didn't vote. The turnout of Hispanics, about which the GOP became totally obsessed and remains totally obsessed, was meager. They are the lowest voting cohort in the entire country. That has been true for decades, and they voted at a lower rate in 2012 than they had in 2008. If that is the sleeping giant, it is sound asleep, and as I will get to in my remarks as I move toward the end, I think it's going to stay asleep for a good deal longer. Boehner and O'Connell should have shut down the DHS to deny funds to process Obama's illegal amnesties and fire up the GOP base. Look, the sole accomplishment that the Department of Homeland Security has is to turn America's borders into Swiss cheese and the interior into anarchy by undermining the enforcement capabilities of the Border Patrol, ICE, and USCIS. But they couldn't wait to wave the right flag in their phony battle over the DHS funding. I mean, we knew from day one that they were going to give in. The question was just when. Apart from pointing fingers at each other, you know, do you remember that? And so Boehner's saying, well, you go first, and O'Connell's saying, no, you go first. All they did was repeat the lie that shutting down one government agency would anger the public so much, you know, there'd be an unending political price. Well, didn't the GOP shut down the entire federal government for weeks over Obamacare? And what happened? They won a gigantic victory in the midterm election. They paid no political price for doing that. In fact, the public likes it when the GOP shows it has a little bit of strength. The national security argument was also completely mendacious. All of the DHS's frontline agencies would have been in place, not to mention 17 national security agencies, the U.S. military, the National Guard, state and local police enforcement. GOP leadership, let's get frank now, they did nothing because they are not on our side. Instead of using Congress's power of the purse, they went AWOL and punted to the judiciary. And by the way, if anything happens in the judiciary, we'll get to that, don't think, you know, they had some kind of prevision. You know, they just kicked the ball, they just threw it away. It was a Hail Mary pass. They just didn't want to have the ball in their hands. The good news on November 4, 2015 was that the GOP took back the Senate and increased its majority in the House. So what's the bad news? The bad news is the GOP took back the Senate and increased its majority in the House. That's why this is a Tea Party group and not a Republican club. The lesson is to take the advice of Don Vito Corleone. Keep your enemies close and keep your friends even closer. GOP leadership cannot be trusted on immigration. They support amnesty, bogus guest worker programs, and a gigantic increase in low-skilled labor. They are Obama's silent partners. They want the same thing, but for different reasons. The essence of Obama's scheme to remake America is by amnestying millions of illegal aliens and then doubling legal low-skilled immigration to move our national politics sharply to the left. And by the way, amnesty is actually, in terms of total numbers, a minor consideration. It's the doubling of legal immigration that's really going to do it. In Washington, we refer to amnesty as a weapon of mass distraction. That will turn America into a one-party state, with the Democrats being the permanent ruling party, like the PRI is in Mexico. That is warfare through demographics. The goal will be achieved by raising the percentage of America's population that is not white. Mexican immigrants and illegal aliens are ideal for this purpose because they are also the two most left-wing cohorts in the country. And that data comes again from the Pew Hispanic Center. Only 32% of Mexican immigrants or illegal aliens believe that capitalism is a good thing. 81% want a much bigger government handing out much more in the way of goodies. And I don't know what the Republicans are up to. You're never going to outbid the Democrats on that. You'll never give them more poison than the Democrats are willing to give. Don't get into bargaining, but that's the deal. You have the most left-wing constituency right there. They're coming from a revolutionary society which is controlled, centrally controlled, with enormous corruption and enormous violence, and you wonder, why we see these patterns being repeated right here. The GOP also wants legalization and huge increases, but their sole motivation is very simple: greed. They want to satisfy their donors and owners in the Chamber of Commerce, the agribusiness lobby, the tech lobby, and manufacturers associations with an endless supply of cheap labor. And this vast immigration will severely depress wages for American workers. No economist, no matter how smart, has outsmarted the rule of the law of supply and demand. And also it's going to drive wages down. It's already doing it for large numbers of middle-class Americans in the tech sector. It will doom the Republican Party. There's no question. It will doom it. But the profits will blind the corporatists to the political ramifications. And then the political ramifications will come and they will scream, but it will be too late. GOP leadership has vowed not to pursue any additional immigration-related legislation in the Congress. But that has not stopped a few principled House GOP members from authoring excellent bills that deserve your support. Most are not going to become law because of Obama's formidable veto power, but passing them matters because it puts the fingerprints of the Democrats on these outrages. Representative Lamar Smith, my favorite member of Congress, from Texas's 21st District, has authored several of these. The Legal Workplace Act would make E-Verify mandatory, long overdue. Representative Stephen King of Iowa's Birthright Citizenship Act is meant to end this atrocious policy. Every year, between 350,000 and 400,000 children are born to the mothers of illegal aliens. They are now citizens, and that provides a quasi-legal anchor for their families. Another bill seeks to end the de facto partnership that the U.S. government entered into with the cartels during last summer's so-called surge of unaccompanied child arrivals. The families paid the Mexican drug cartels $8,000 a head to bring them from Central America. The feds completed the shipment by delivering them to their relatives already here illegally. Sponsored by Lamar Smith and Representative Jason Chaffetz of Utah's 3rd District, the Asylum Reform and Border Protection Act seeks the expedited removal of these child arrivals. Obama and Jay Johnson, you may remember, promised us that those people would be deported expeditiously. Of course, most were not, in fact, fact, unaccompanied children. There were 47,000 families there. The rest were older adolescent male gangbangers and cartel members, and poof, all of them have disappeared into America. 5%, this is almost, I mean, if we weren't so hideous, it'd be funny. 5% only showed up for their hearing with the immigration authorities after being here for a certain number of months. And what happened? They were told to come back in 1220. I don't know about expedited removal. A bill by Congressman Bill Posey from Florida would do away with the visa lottery. It's called the SAFE Act for America. The visa lottery is a terrible program which was created by Edward Kennedy. It awards 55,000 green cards to citizens from countries from which we tend to take few immigrants. But the lottery does a couple of really bad things. It contributes to chain immigration because it rewards distant relatives of the person whose only qualification was having good odds to win the lottery, and because many of these go to people from countries on the terrorist watch list. And members of terrorist organizations keep entering the lottery. You enter, you start winning. Another excellent bill is Trey Gowdy's Strengthen and Fortify Enforcement Act. And that's been passed by the House, but again, it won't get through the Senate. It seeks to restore and expand federal programs that once promoted cooperation between local police forces and ICE to enforce federal immigration law, as well as to provide training in immigration to local cops. The murder of Kate Steinlight and the murder and rape of thousands like her would likely never have happened if these programs had been in place. A variant of that bill, the Davis-Oliver Act, introduced by Representative Trey Gowdy in the House and by my favorite senator, Senator Jeff Sessions in the Senate, would block federal aid from cities that ignore ICE detainer orders. The legislation would also reinstate 287G programs that allow local law enforcement to assist in enforcing immigration law. I mean, think about the situation we are under with these sanctuary cities and now a sanctuary state, where you can essentially secede from America. You can essentially say, I'm not going to enforce that law. You know, to put it mildly, this is anarchy. The word for this is anarchy. You know, when in 1954, the governor of Alabama, the governor of Arkansas didn't want to desegregate the schools in Little Rock. Eisenhower didn't have any problem. What did he do? He sent in the 101st Airborne Division. The first time a sanctuary city was declared, I would have done the same, and I would have arrested the mayor. I would have placed the mayor and the city council all under arrest for treason. What is going on here? I mean, is this becoming, you know, like the 300 states of the German Imperial Empire in the 16th century? Everybody has their own laws. Earlier on, I cited a Day 6 Machina that might restore America's identity as a nation of checks and balances, to rein in political power, and as a nation of laws. And that entity is our admittedly unpredictable and at times worrying judiciary. Leading the charge is the state of Texas. Governor Abbott has played a pivotal role in assembling the plaintiffs for a lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of Obama's unilateral amnesties, 26 states, by the way. The lead attorney is Texas's Solicitor General, Ken Paxton. The first blow against Obama's amnesties was struck by Judge Andrew S. Hainan, the federal district judge for the Southern District of Texas. That's from Brownsville. On February 16, in a very elegant ruling, limited to Obama's non-compliance with administrative legal requirements, Hainan erected the first bastion against Obama's juggernaut. He ruled for the plaintiffs, enjoining USCIS from launching DAPA, that is, the parents, to legalize the parents of the DACA people. That's 5 to 6 million illegal aliens, and also to expand DACA by 100,000. He opined that these actions were unconstitutional, but he made his rulings on narrow technical grounds. The DOJ sought relief from the 5th District Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans. In a split decision 3-2, the Fifth Circuit upheld Judge Haynen's stay. The composition, now, as in Dickens's novel Bleak House, the judicial fog starts descending. The DOJ returned to the Fifth Circuit to seek relief again from Haynen's emergency stay. And at issue were the narrow grounds of his first holding. That hearing was held just a few days ago, on July 10. It did not go well for the Obama administration. And one of the judges sourly reminded the DOJ's lawyers of Obama's remarks in Chicago last December that he said, "I made the law. I made the law that protected illegal aliens from deportation." It's hard to say when, but it's likely that we will have the verdict on this appeal in the next, say, 2 months. The administration's lawyers, though, and the heads of all of the agencies that the DHS may find themselves appearing in Judge Haynen's court much sooner than they'd like to, and on a related matter. Despite Judge Haynen's injunction not to proceed with DAPA, USCIS went ahead and distributed 2,000 work permits to illegal aliens. Judge Haynen is not a man to be trifled with, and he was not amused by this. He has ordered all the DHS agencies to explain in writing and to his satisfaction why they violated his ruling. If he's not satisfied, or if they do not respond speedily, he has ordered the DHS Director, Jay Johnson, along with the heads of ICE and USCIS, to appear in his court on August 19 and explain why they should not be held in contempt. This administration, illegal stealth evasions of immigration law, is an extremely serious matter, and there's a long track record, but I just want to focus on a couple things here. Just one case in point. At CIS, we often get our best information, our best ways in to the system by tips from whistleblowers. And we got one, and we filed a series of FOI requests to USCIS about data that looked very suspicious to us. And we finally got our hands on it. They tried to screw up the numbers and give it to us in ways that were unreadable, but we're not stupid. And we figured it all out. What does it show? It showed that back in 2009, Obama and his co-conspirators set up a rogue immigration authorization system without informing Congress. And that illegal agency handed out approximately 7.4 million work authorizations to illegal aliens and foreign residents. These permits, by the way, were given to people whose legal status or visa categories prohibit them by law from working here, making the distribution, in fact, a crime. Among those who received them were visa overstayers, people on tourist visas, and student visas. They were also given to guest workers whose time was running out. Consider what this tells us also about Obama's priorities. 2009, the year that rogue system went into effect, was the height of the Great Recession. 17% of America's workforce was suffering from U6 unemployment. There were tens of millions of Americans out of work or working part-time or having despaired of finding any work at all. Yet the president illegally granted work permits to 7.4 million people to compete with U.S. citizens for jobs. And in a speech this past December, also in Chicago, he said, have no right to prefer Americans over foreigners in their hiring. That, by the way, is a view that is at variance with 90% of the American people, including, by the way, a great majority of Democrats. The DOJ's next move is going to go back to Judge Haynen's court in Brownsville to argue that he lift his stay on the substance of the lawsuit, and that is to say, whether Obama's unilateral amnesties are constitutional. Haynen's predictable rejection of that brief is going to be appealed. It will be appealed either to the Fifth Circuit, en banc, or the Supreme Court. If they go to the Fifth Circuit first, the plaintiffs can request to be heard one way or the other. They can be heard by a 3-member panel, or en banc, which means by the full membership of the district. The Fifth District has 24 judges, and it is described, by the way, as conservative. Most of the appointees by far most of those judges were appointed by Republican presidents. 15, only 7 by Democrats, 3 of whom were appointed by Obama. So there's no question that the administration is going to try to go with a 3-member lottery. Now they could bypass the Fifth Circuit and go right to the Supreme Court. They would have to go to Judge Scalia, who oversees the Fifth Circuit, and ask for an appeal. And the fact that the Fifth Circuit is conservative seems to suggest that that would be the way to go. But my guess is, and certainly if I were in the shoes of the administration's lawyers, I would want as many bites at the apple as I could get. I mean, let us remember that our president, on 22 occasions, explicitly said that conferring a unilateral amnesty without Congress is a clear violation of the Constitution. This is the president in words. He changed his mind, but he never explained the logic on which he changed it. Our chances also look good because a linchpin of Obama's defense of executive amnesty, and that is that it is a proper exercise of prosecutorial discretion, has already been undermined by the Inspector General of the Department of Homeland Security, John Roth. Obama claims that by deferring action on millions of quote-unquote ordinary illegal aliens, by the way, they are sometimes humorously described as law-abiding illegal aliens. Ain't no such thing as law-abiding illegal alien. So they could focus their limited resources on higher priorities, namely those who are threats to national security or represent a threat to public safety. That's the argument. But Roth points out, he said, DHS doesn't gather and analyze prosecutorial data. It doesn't have the ability to assess its current immigration enforcement activities or to develop future policy. So the whole thing is a fraud. A case based on prosecutorial discretion also looks pretty thin, given the fact that in fiscal year 2013 and fiscal year 2014, well, let's go back to 13, ICE released 36,588 violent illegal felons and did the same for 30,007 the following year. These criminals committed amongst them 200,000 violent felonies, including robbery, sexual assault, kidnapping, voluntary manslaughter, and homicide. Fully 27% of this group are so-called level ones. That is to say, the worst of the worst. Those are the people walking out on the street. Prosecutorial discretion, I think there is no prosecutorial discretion. As I say, what we have is anarchy. What we have is pure lawlessness. Now, the Supreme Court is going to make another ruling in 2016, which is going to have enormous impact on American democracy, and I think it's one of the few hopeful things out there. And that is, it is finally going to decide a question which has been hovering over us for a very long time, and that is, what does one person, one vote mean? Now, if the Supreme Court should side with the plaintiffs, who are, by the way, 2 Texas voters, God bless Texas, Sue Evanwell and Edward Fenninger, the ruling would shift political power away from cities to more rural areas, smaller towns, a move that would radically reduce the political power of the Hispanic community for the foreseeable future and benefit the GOP and maybe give the GOP some time to figure out what it is. The Supreme Court has never resolved a very basic issue in our democratic process, whether voting districts should have the same number of people or the same number of eligible voters. The current practice, by the way, is to count everybody. And that greatly increases the political representation of places with large numbers of residents who cannot legally vote, including immigrants who are legal residents but not citizens, illegal aliens, children, and prisoners. And these places are overwhelmingly urban and overwhelmingly Democrat. Ruling that districts must be based on equal numbers of voters would move political power away from cities with their many immigrants and children and toward older, whiter, more homogeneous areas. The ruling would have greatest impact in border states with the largest proportions of non-citizens: California, Texas, Arizona, and Nevada. But the impact would obviously be national because illegal aliens are an issue right across the entire country. The Supreme Court turned away 3 similar challenges in the last 25 years. But since John Roberts has been Chief Justice, the court has been picking around on voting cases. And in one, in 2013, Shelby County versus Holder, a closely divided court struck down a ruling which many people saw as the heart of the Voting Rights Act. And that was ending the requirement for pre-clearance in southern states which had past histories of voter discrimination. The court got rid of the pre-clearance requirement. The case that it plans to hear, Evenwell v. Abbott, concerned state and local voting districts, but a decision will also obviously affect congressional redistricting. It will also mean that the Bureau of the Census will have to conduct its census in a very different way from the way we do now. The case challenges how districts are drawn for the Texas Senate, and the plaintiffs complain that there are voters or potential voters in Texas whose Senate votes are worth approximately 1.5 times that of the appellants. Now, back in November, a federal district court in Austin dismissed the case, saying the Supreme Court has generally held that total population is the metric of comparison. And they noted that SCOTUS had never required any particular standard, and so the choice was up to the states. Federal courts have ruled that counting everyone's permissible, but judges acknowledge that SCOTUS's decisions support the logic of both approaches. Counting everybody ensures what is referred to as representational equality, meaning people, at least in theory, are looked after. On the other hand, counting only eligible voters vindicates the founding principle in this country that voters hold ultimate political power in our democracy. And by the way, the consensus of law professors in this country is that it is the view that one vote, one person means one vote, one eligible voter. Yeah. That is the consensus. 2001, when the Supreme Court turned down a possible hearing of such a case, Justice Clarence Thomas objected. He said, "We have never determined the relevant population that states and localities must equally distribute among their districts." And he added, quote, "As long as we sustain the one person, one vote principle, we have an obligation to explain to states and localities just what that means." You know, so much for the stupid Justice Thomas. It's a very, very important statement. As I said, a ruling for the appellants would dramatically shift political power in this country. The Democrats' plan for the demographic shift in America, focused on the Hispanic community, would become a much longer, more difficult pathway. And also, as I said, the problem is in these areas, it's not just that you're dealing with non-citizens, but the Hispanic demographic skews dramatically younger than the white demographic, so there are fewer voters. So the ruling, in effect, would keep many states with rising Hispanic populations red well into the future, and it would allow the GOP inroads in states like Arizona, California, New Mexico, and Nevada. So, you've been very patient. I want to thank you for your patience. Much more, I want to thank you for your patriotism, and as the most interesting man in the world would say, stay thirsty, my friends.
Do some Q&A?
I'm sorry?
Question and answer.
I hope so.
Okay.
Cartel is taking over Obama?
I don't know about Obama, but your question's very interesting. The question was, do you think the cartels have overtaken Obama? Look, the borders are open because people in power want it that way. You don't think we could secure the border if we wanted to? Of course we could. One of the members of our board at CIS, who's, by the way, a dear friend and kind of my mentor, unfortunately just died a few months ago, way too young, in his 70s. He was a professor for 40 years at the College of William and Mary, and he just wrote before he, the book was just published a few months before he died, and I reviewed it, a book about the Mexican cartels. Obviously, one subject that barely gets touched, and I think one reason it barely gets touched is that nobody wants to really go down there and wants to do the research, because you're not going to come back in one piece, or you're going to end up in a stew, because that's what they do, is the drug business. Look, the drug industry is more profitable than the oil industry. We're talking about trillions of dollars. And that was, flowing across the border, obviously are Mexicans coming to make more money, some Mexicans coming to do mischief, but also Mexico is the biggest supplier of drugs into this country. Now, Mexico is a very corrupt place. There's not a single civil society institution there that's clean. Maybe the Navy Commando Group's probably the only group that's lawful in any way. But trillions of dollars are getting made. And I don't believe, by the way, that all the corruption is just on the Mexican side. For this game to work, you got to have a lot of corruption on our side. And that corruption, my guess is, includes attorneys general, it includes the head of state police, it includes people on the Border Patrol, it includes governors, my guess is it includes bank presidents, and where are these trillions of dollars going? So I think you're on to something extremely important. I don't think every instinct tells me that this is an enormously important matter. And I think it's fascinating that we don't know more, and I think we all know the reason we don't know more, and that is that we're dealing with one of the most murderous groups of people in the world. The Border Patrol, by the way, has been thoroughly infiltrated by the Mexican cartels, and the Border Patrol's scared. They come up to a guy and they say, Thursday night, don't be in this area, because if you are, your kids are going to get beheaded. That's how it works. And if you remember a couple of years ago when that great lady, Janet Napolitano, who now runs your university system, was running DHS, she told the border agents when they were fired upon by the drug cartels, do not return fire. Incredible. Anyway, great question, and obviously a very rich area.
I can speak up.
I'm sorry.
I'll just speak up.
Yes. I'm sorry. Sometimes people can't hear.
Okay. I was watching this TV show on CNN called Breaking Borders. And so the whole premise of the show is they take one side of the borders issues and then so this was about immigration. So they took this lady that's a nurse over in Mexico. She's a white person and she's like pro-immigration. And the other side is on the Texas side. And so they interviewed this one guy that he was out in Texas and he patrols the border with AK-47s and all that. No, AR-15s, excuse me. But they were saying that the lady was just like she was been on the liberal end of it, and she goes, now, do you think this is inappropriate, you know? And it's like, he goes, when I'm out here and they're out here, I'm not really here for the immigration end of it, I'm here for the drug end of it. Because you see these mules coming by. And also, like what Tom Clancy wrote in one of his last books, he wrote that Al-Qaeda is nothing compared to the cartels.
Thank you. Those points were very much worth making. There was a great cartoon, by the way, in the New Yorker magazine, and you see two devils in hell, and they're both looking very disconsolate. And they say, you know, I really miss the days when there used to be good and evil. Now there's just appropriate and inappropriate. Anyway, I want to make one point, though, before, you know, of course I'd be happy to take more questions. I'm happy to stay till the last bell dies, and I know people want to go and, you know, drink and be merry, because tomorrow we probably will die. The way things are going.
We still have an hour.
I am not opposed to immigration. I believe I support legal immigration, but the numbers must be lower, and we must do something we've never done. We have to have meritocratic criteria. People have to be good at something. We should be selecting the best and the brightest, not just taking endless numbers of people through chain immigration. The only engine we have is extended family unification. Now, I'm sorry. I mean, you know, family values. Yeah, I've got family, I've got kids. I love my family, you know. But, you know, when you start out with one person, you start out with Uncle Paco, and before you know it, you have a whole village is here. It's no way to run a business. I mean, Canada has a point system. It's much smarter than what we have. And I'm not only talking, by the way, when I say people with, you know, skills, I'm not just talking about white-collar people. I'm not just talking about doctors or academicians. I'm talking about, you know, first-class electricians and plumbers and builders. And I mean, we need people who are really good at stuff. We don't need people who come over the border. 1 week they're flipping hamburgers. The next week at 5 a.m. a builder picks them up on the side of the highway and they're building your house. And thank God, you know, probably the only person, at least the electrician, has probably been trained somewhere. But nobody else is. I mean, any of you who've done any work, construction work, you know, you have to do jobs well. You have to have like some training and apprenticeships and all that kind of stuff. These guys don't know anything.
Yeah, I think the 17% of Americans that were looking for work were
I'm sorry, I just want
probably...
to say it to people in here.
Okay.
I say the 17% of Americans that were unemployed looking for work, most of them were probably lazy.
Well,
That's what I think.
I don't think the data sustains that. I mean, is it true that there's some people who abuse the welfare system? Yeah, undoubtedly. But we did a study. You know, one of the urban legends is, you know, these are jobs only Mexicans will do. Not true. The Department of Commerce has a list, 462 jobs that are the most commonly performed jobs in America. And except for 4 of them, and you know, there are specific jobs, and I think these are all, by the way, in agriculture, not that it matters. Americans dominate every one of those job categories. There are no jobs Americans will not do. And Americans are now competing head-to-head with workers who are coming here and are willing to work for nothing because they're still making more than they were working in Mexico. And by the way, I don't think American workers should work for nothing. You know, I don't want to be in a situation where we take in millions of people who are willing to turn America into a third world society. It's just not, I just don't see that as working. And again, every job, even, I'll give you some examples that you probably think only Mexicans do. By the way, fully half of the agricultural workers in this country are American natives. Half. Most maids are Americans. Most people doing work in hotels and motels, it may surprise you, they're American. Most people doing eviscerating chickens are American. I can go on, and the most dangerous and hardest jobs in America are done only by Americans. There are hardly any immigrants in mining, in fishing, in timbering, none. I mean, Americans are willing to work very hard. Sorry, Mr. Bush, you don't know what it is to work. You were born with a golden spoon in your mouth and somewhere else. And I don't want to hear this from Jeff Bush, that Americans don't work hard enough. By the way, Americans work harder than anyone in Europe, and probably most hard than any other first world country. People here are not lazy. And they're willing to do any job there is, but they're not willing to work for nothing. And I do not want to see the mass invasion of our country by an underclass lead to the rebarbarization of American capitalism. I don't think we should be going back to 1900, and sweatshops. I don't think that's what we want. I think we got ourselves out of that. It was a great struggle to give workers in this country rights and benefits and dignity, and this is going to destroy that. And by the way, if the Republican Party ever wants to become a majority party, it had better find some kind of agenda for working class people, or we'll never make it. Never.
Is the Justice Department and the bank regulators still trying to not finance gun dealers and precious metal dealers? Are they still trying to do that?
I honestly don't know. I'm not familiar with them. I can't speak to them. I'm sorry. I'm not going to pretend that I know what I don't know.
I had one.
The one thing that you didn't cover that I personally feel why Obama's doing what he's doing, part of it, other than the vote, there'll be a lot of them voting next year, is the culture. I personally think he's trying to destroy the American culture.
I tried to touch on that, fleetingly. Obviously, we would be, I could go on all night if we really were going to give this thing. But when I talked about the idea that beyond our various identities, where our parents came from, or our grandparents came from, that we have to have a greater sense of national belonging. In other words, I am first and foremost an American. In fact, that's the only thing I am. You want to ask me who I am, I'm an American. You want to ask me where my father came from, that's a different question. You want to ask me what my religion is, that's a different question. Or my lack of religion. You want to ask me what my politics are, that's a different question. I'm not a hyphenated anything. I'm an American, pure and simple. Now, what's happened is the elite in this country, and the elite, by the elite I mean both the fiscal and the cultural elite, and this includes the academia, the prestige newspapers, all of it. They have determined, they moved to this insane multicultural model, which is ultimately totally fractionating. We're losing our social cohesion, and they even go so far as to make the claim that there's no such thing as an American. Americans, it's a myth that all we are a bunch of competing diaspora communities that came from somewhere else. I'm sorry, they just don't get it. Now, it's true that there are things that used to work better if we're going to talk about immigrants, we used to have things that had made the process of becoming an American much better. Okay, my dad was born in Russia, and he came to the United States during the Russian Civil War in 1921. We had Americanization classes. Can you imagine if you used the word Americanization, they'd say racist, right? We taught civics. People actually knew something about how the government functioned. People took language classes intensively. My father came to this country at 15, didn't know a word of English. He graduated 7 years later from the University of Alabama. Okay? And he made it, by the way, on a tennis scholarship. The bottom line is, we don't have the things that used to help immigrants immigrants enter into American society, for the most part, have gone away. For example, ethnic organizations, whether it was the Steuben Society for German Americans, the Pulaski Society of Polish people, the Knights of Columbus, the Italian community. These groups, yes, they existed to give the arrivals from the old country, a sense of, at-homeness, but they really had a larger purpose, and their larger purpose was to integrate folks into American society. We also had a trade union movement. I know a lot of you probably don't like trade union movements, but I can tell you one thing, people in this country work for wage wouldn't have anything if we hadn't had unions. Now, unfortunately, they got piggy, and we only have them in the public sector. But the fact is, unions were a tremendous asset in terms of integrating immigrants. So was the military. I am a firm believer in compulsory national service. I think that everyone has to do national service. It doesn't have to be military. But everyone should do, if you get out of high school, either you go into the military, or you say teach for America, or you work with old folks, or you do something for something other than yourself. You do something for America. We don't have that. And I think those kinds of things build, they build the bonds that create a society. And we now have, what we have are just fractionating forces at work. We have to turn that around. And obviously, one of the things that we have to do on the cultural level, and I'm sure those of you who worked on the Common Core are concerned about this, and we're all concerned about this, is the fact that the elite in this society seems to believe that America's primary role is that education's primary role is to remind us of how monstrous we are and how vicious and vile we are as a society and that we need to make permanent and unending apologies. And of course, we have a president, now we've got a president who have served 2 terms, has gone all around the world making apologies for the United States of America. Look, this is the freest, most equal, most tolerant society in the history of humanity. And, one gets tired of this kind of stuff after a while. It's a little amusing at first, and then it becomes infuriating. And it's infuriating especially when the people who think this way, and it's completely cracked, are actually running all of our institutions. I mean, I was an academic, as I said, for 25. I could never go back to university campus now. I mean, the culture of political correctness is just insanity. It's insanity. And notice that the people who practice it are all very privileged. Very privileged. They have it very good. But it doesn't stop them, and I think it's part of their, it's part of their trying to deal, morally with their privileged existences by, vilifying their own country. I don't get it, but it's obviously, it's rife, it's everywhere. But yeah, sure, Larry, the multiculturalism has replaced the notion of, the melting pot. That died a long time ago. And then we had a salad bowl. Remember the salad bowl? And now the salad bowl's not good enough. But you know what? With all of these people telling us, this isn't America, that's not America, there's no America, you all are here because you know there is. They can't see it, we can see it. We know it, we feel it. We have a culture. And it's built into the Constitution, it's built into our history, it's built into our values. I don't know. Anyone else want to ask a question about immigration? Yeah. I'll get back to you.
I'm surprised there's that many.
Yes, I'd like to hear how you would structure a so-called national service without it becoming a brown shirt affair.
Say that again?
How you would structure national service for every high school graduate, not going into the military, without it becoming a government issue, brown shirt kind of operation.
Get rid of the Democrats.
That's a $64,000 question. I don't think government programs by definition are always bad. I think government, for the most part, I think we need government. It's a necessary evil, if you will, but we can't do without it. It seems to me that we have a military that, for the most part, works pretty well. Organizations like Teach for America have worked very well. We haven't tried, we haven't expanded them as well as they could be expanded, and they can be. I think you have to create a body of programs that you think would attract people's energies and their creativity. Get smart people involved in formulating it. Go to local communities and talk to people. But I think that, as I said, I think that we need to have a much greater sense of why are you here tonight? You're here because you want civic involvement. Okay, are you perfect? No, you're here because you also you bond together because you care about the country and you want to have a means and a vehicle to do it with other people. And that's, it seems to me, the heart of the Tea Party movement, which, by the way, I don't see as conservative so much as radical, to tell you the truth. And I think, your disgust with the Republican Party flows, I don't think, from necessarily being more conservative. I think it's being more radical, by which I mean really going to the heart of stuff and getting past the ball. But yeah, I think there are all sorts of good possibilities. And obviously, you asked me a question. This is the kind of thing that you put together over several years with people with a lot of expertise. But it seems to me that people are going, we're shipping people off to colleges and universities. By the way, many of whom shouldn't be going. College and universities aren't for everybody. If you know that you want to do something different, you want to do a different kind of work, then if you know what you want, you shouldn't be going. What we ought to also be building in this country we have them to some extent, community colleges really don't work all that well. We need to create polytechnical institutes. In places like Germany and Scandinavia, they have these are, by the way, first-rate academic institutions. People come out of them, they know they want to go into computers, so they go there, they computer training. They know they want to go into nursing, they go there. You don't need a BA to be a nurse, but you need intensive training in nursing. If you want a BA because you want to exercise your mind and you want to live the life of the mind and read books and think about stuff, great, go to college. But if you're not really intellectually curious, but you want to pursue a particular path in life, why should you rack up several $100,000 worth of debt, for the most part at second or third-rate institutions, and get out with nothing, with no particular skills or abilities or whatever, unless you have, unless you want to live the life of the mind. Then it makes sense. I went to college and I went to graduate school and I became a professor. It was perfect. It worked for me. But if I had wanted to go into business afterwards, the sort of studies I did would have been worthless. If I wanted to go into technology, what I did was worthless. If you know those are things you want to do, it seems to me, we should create institutions that work. The university system in this country has become a multi-billion-dollar, fabulously corrupt enterprise. And I think it's time to react to the lies that it proffers. It's suffering kids and bankrupting families, and the results aren't there in terms of the output for jobs and so on. Again, I don't think it's the role of universities to give people job training. That's why we should have polytechs. But if you want to go because you like physics or you want to study foreign language, that's a great reason to go to a university, not to go looking for a job.
I agree 100% with what you said, but my comment is for this gentleman to avoid the brown shirt. The Constitution gave the states rights to do everything that was not enumerated in the Constitution to the federal government. It doesn't have to be a federal government program, public service. It could be organized through the states.
Okay, that sounds great to me. I have no objection. Obviously, I'm a strong supporter of the 10th Amendment. Everything not explicitly there is left to the states. So let these be programs that are developed at the state level. That may be the best place to develop them because those people closest to the communities, the population, will probably have a better sense of what would work. My notion behind this is simply that some entity, whether it's a state government, probably much better than the federal government, should create possibilities for people so that people are civically engaged and live their lives not selfishly, that they give something to the society from which they have received so much. I think that, that to me is patriotism. You spend a couple of years, as John Kennedy said, that's not what your country can do for you, that's what you can do for your country. Do something for your country, for God's sake.
Why are we paying the illegals to become citizens? I never understood that.
Yeah.
Well, what's interesting, by the way, is only yesterday, I read a poll in the Washington Post done by one of the polling groups that I consider to be pretty credible, that said that most Hispanics are not interested in a path to citizenship. Most either illegal aliens or immigrants don't want it. They want the jobs. They want jobs. They don't care about citizenship. But I have to tell you something. I would not want American society to evolve into a situation where we have two different classes of people. I don't want to have helots like ancient Sparta, and then the people with rights. If you come to America, I want you to be a citizen. I want you, not if you come illegally. If you come illegally, I want you out of here. But if you come here legally, I want you to become a stakeholder. I want you to be loyal. I want you to share our values. We tried having two classes of people. It was called slavery and then Jim Crow laws. It wasn't very good, and we're still living with the after effects of it. Okay? We have a tremendous race problem in this society, which has 100 causes, but having had two strata of human beings for a couple hundred years didn't help. I'd rather us be more like ancient Athens than Sparta. I do not want a class of servitors and a class of the owners. We need one group of people, citizens, that have a sense of responsibility, who are shareholders and stakeholders, and therefore care about the country. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a huge, alienated foreign population that will end up betraying you. You'll end up with civic disorder. It's a disaster. It's a formula for a total disaster.
Obama's working it right now.
I'm sorry?
Obama is working that right now.
Well, sometimes I think, his philosophy almost is the worse the better. I don't know. I do feel that, I've lived, for 67 years. I've lived under a whole lot of different presidents, and I liked some, I didn't like others, but I think I always had the feeling that each and every one of them, at base, was interested in the good of the society. I don't feel confident about this president. And that's very painful to say. It's not only painful, it's infuriating. And certainly, the misuse, the way that immigration laws have been nullified, the way he's using immigration as a demographic, culture changer, political changer, is extremely insidious. It's very dangerous. And as I say, right now, because we have a Congress, a do-nothing Congress, the Republicans are as bad as the Democrats. They have bamboozled us on immigration. I wonder how they dare come back and ask people to vote for them. They said we're going to go in there, we're going to sort the immigration thing out, remember? And then they just, hey, suckers, you voted for us? Bye. We're not touching that issue anymore. Yeah, the Democrats are pretty hopeless. I never looked to them. But I think maybe, believe it or not, the Supreme Court might pull it out of the fire for us. We'll just have to see.
I don't know,
this is actually true or not, but I've heard that, you know, Congress is pretty upset about the way this immigration thing's going. So what I've heard, and again, I can't prove it either way, but I've heard that Obama is now going to use the United Nations to go over Congress to bring these immigrants into our country. You know, whether it's true, I don't know.
I mean, I don't know. Obviously, I can't speak to that. But we've seen something today. A very, very dangerous and disturbing thing happened today. And that is that Obama took the Iran treaty, this outrageous series of concessions and appeasements of a fanatical regime, surrendering point after point. In fact, surrendering things he didn't even have to surrender. Things the Iranians didn't even ask for, he gave them. Okay, and what did he do? He said it was respect the role of Congress in this. And by the way, boy, did Corker mess this up so that, you know, we need the supermajority to defeat it. In the old days, you needed the supermajority to approve it, you know, to approve it. He would have to come to us and get 67 votes. We wouldn't have to defeat him with 67 votes. I mean, the fix was in on that. But Obama said he was going to give Congress the word, yes? Well, today the Security Council, we went to the Security Council, which has approved the treaty. United Nations Security Council has approved the treaty. So this is moving from caring about the sovereignty of this country to looking to international institutions to take over our sovereignty. And this is not, you know, obviously some paranoid thing. We witnessed this today in regard to a treaty of the gravest possible consequences. And he takes this to the United Nations. He doesn't even wait for Congress to respond. As I say, it's outrageous. And it speaks, I can't speak to that on the immigration question, but obviously there is a proclivity to go, you know, take the universalistic, multifaceted route, whatever, but the notion of grounding, you know, your decision-making in American constitutional institutions doesn't seem to be high on the agenda.
Thank you, Stephen.